If we really want to beat this pandemic, not just contain it, but turn back the clock to a time when we didn't have to worry about the coronavirus, we need a vaccine. Fortunately, this morning, two of the largest players in the vaccine space, GlaxoSmithKline and Sanofi, announced a partnership to do just that and then rapidly scale up production. Now, it will take months before we see any results here, but any progress on this front is a major positive. That's why I was thrilled to sit down with Emma Walmsley. Emma is the terrific CEO of GlaxoSmithKline. It was earlier today. Take a look. Emma, I think this is a pretty historic alliance. Can you tell us what each party brings to the equation?
Sure. Well, hi, Jim. And first of all, let me say thank you on behalf of GSK to all the frontline healthcare workers and all the scientists in the world who are working to stop this virus. What we announced today, we think, is an unprecedented collaboration between two of the world's biggest vaccines manufacturers, two leaders who are both bringing proven pandemic technologies and scale to develop, hopefully, an adjuvanted vaccine against COVID-19. Now, an adjuvanted one is something that makes the difference. So Sanofi are going to contribute their antigen, and we are going to contribute our proven pandemic adjuvant. And an adjuvant basically is a booster to the antigen. So you need less of the antigen. So, for example, in the H1N1 epidemic, although you shouldn't do a direct translation, we needed 4 times less antigen. So you can basically protect more people at scale faster. So that's the goal here. A lot of work to do. But we also, of course, both bring significant manufacturing capacity. And if we're successful, that we're hoping to get to hundreds of millions of doses by the end of next year. But a lot of work to do. And we're sure the world will need more than one vaccine, considering the state of demand.
Emma, why is this particular illness so much more difficult than other things that we've seen you tackle?
Well, there's an enormous amount we don't know about this virus still, and there are scientists and academics in both industry and beyond it working incredibly hard and exchanging data, as fast as we can to understand it. But where you're right is it definitely flags a need for us all to invest in pandemic preparedness for the long term. And that was something that GSK wanted also to announce today. This collaboration is one of 7 that we're doing in vaccines for COVID-19. And we're committed, when we look at that whole portfolio of vaccines, not to profit from it during this pandemic, but to make sure we're reinvesting in COVID research, not just necessarily for COVID-19, but coronaviruses, and also in long-term pandemic preparedness, be that with GSK's own investments or with other institutions and governments, as we start to think about how the world can be better ready next time. We think that's a very important contribution for us to make.
Now, Emma, I always think of you two companies as competitors. Now, not vicious competitors, because you're gentlemanly in the way you approach things, but it is rather difficult for me to imagine the collaboration. What happens? I mean, have you already gotten together and realized what your strengths are? Or are you going to merge into one room? And the reason I say this is because I don't know if people understand how historic it is to get these two companies that are both great at what they do to collaborate in a way that is not for money.
Well, first of all, we still do want to make sure that we price responsibly, and any short-term profits are invested in future research. But now is not the time to be thinking about competition, Jim. This is a crisis, whether or not from a direct health point of view, an indirect health point of view, considering the economic ramifications that we're all just starting to realize. Now, it's all hands on deck, whether that be across the industry with a variety of collaborations, or with various incredibly important institutions like the Gates Foundation, CEPI, the WHO, and governments around the world. I mean, we firmly believe that now is a time to have an approach, from our point of view, that's about partnerships, that is about a global approach. Obviously, countries want to make sure they take domestic care, but it really is important that with global supply chains and global insight, we also look after the most popular nations in the world that are going to be hard hit with quite fragile healthcare systems. It's a time to be looking at a commitment to access, which is why we've also said that we would like to be donating a certain number of our adjuvants to the poorest countries. And again, it is really critical that we are thoughtful about investing in long-term pandemic preparedness. Our industry has a really important purpose to both prevent illness and treat it when it comes. And I'm really proud of colleagues and also others that sit around the industry table and how we're pulling together to try and find solutions.
Emma, how do you develop your time frame? For instance, J&J says, listen, we're going to start it in September. We think we could have something in the first half. You folks are talking about second half. I mean, what happens if it's just much more difficult? And we've been led to believe that there's going to be something out there. And it turns out to be, you know what, once we found out the facts, this thing is very different from young. It's different for old. There have been some problems. We know that there have been people who have died from vaccines that weren't ready yet. I mean, what gives you the encouragement that there could be something out there?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right, Jim. This is still, as with all research in medicines and vaccines, there is risk involved, there are no guarantees, and there's a lot of work ahead. Normally, it takes a decade to develop a vaccine, sometimes even longer. And in this case, I suppose where we get a bit more confidence is we are talking about proven technologies, whether it be with a protein-based antigen or indeed with this adjuvant. Both of them are already licensed. We're also at a time where we're seeing incredible engagement and collaboration from regulators to help us set up the right kind of trials. And we're investing in capacity at risk as well, because every day lost is an expensive one from a health point of view and an economic one. So I think, but it's really important to emphasize that, for those that would wish it was all going to come much faster, we have to guarantee safety here. We have to guarantee efficacy, and we have to be thoughtful as an industry on how we're going to get to scale manufacturing, because obviously the global demand is going to be extremely high. And frankly, there will need to be more than one vaccine. So again, this is not a time when we're thinking competitively. It's a time when we hope for success for everybody, all the companies, large and small, to be able to move forward. And in the meantime, to have effective bridging treatments too is going to be extremely important to support the health systems and healthcare workers that are under so much pressure.
Would you be willing to be the first person to take it when you do phase one?
If it was appropriate, then I would always want to be at the service of the healthcare industry.
Well, it was an asset because I feel like that I'm trying to figure out who gets the vaccine first, trying to figure out what is going to reopen. And I'm very worried. I mean, there's a real pressure here to reopen. But we don't have a vaccine. And I mean, I would love the vaccine so I could get it, reopen. Someone called me a scaredy cat this morning because we didn't have antibodies, we don't have testing, we don't have contact tracing, and we don't have a vaccine. To me, that's kind of the checklist of what we'd like to have before we have everybody just traveling all over the place and feeling great about themselves.
Well, I think it's a really important point. I mean, there are hard-working governments all around the world being very thoughtful about what a phased, responsible, disciplined opening can and should look like, while protecting their health and well-being of their citizenry. I think it is increasingly clear that a complete exit from this is going to require vaccines at scale, probably antibody at scale, and a degree of tracing as well, because as we've seen the tech companies coming through with some very positive potential contributions on that side as well. But in the meantime, since all three of those things at scale on a global scale may take some time, we are probably going to have to adapt to some new ways of living and working. But there are plenty of profound experts working on thinking about the right way to do that, as we cycle out of the, first of all, flatten the peak infection rate and then cycle out of planning intelligently for that. Well,
I want to thank you for what you're doing, and I think people should recognize that the collaboration is historic, unusual, and it's just a testament to the times. But Emma Walmsley, leader in our business, of leader in business. And it's really important that we saw you put a face to this because it's an amazing thing that you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on Mad Money. Emma Walmsley, CEO of GlaxoSmithKline. Great to see you.
Jim, great to see you. Stay well.
Okay, you too.
Don't miss a second of Mad Money. Follow @Jim Cramer on Twitter. Have a question? Tweet Cramer. #MadTweets. Send Jim an email to madmoney@cnbc.com or give us a call at 1-800-743-CNBC. Miss something? Head to madmoney.cnbc.com.